The truth is, to coin a phrase, we have all been in this together. The press, politicians, and leaders of all parties, yes, including me. We have not gripped this issue.
No other country would allow one man to garner 4 national newspapers, the second largest broadcaster, a monopoly on sports rights, and first few movies.
Well, Australia isn't far behind. Welcome to Media Watch. I'm Jonathan Holmes. News Corporation, its power and influence in the UK and in Australia, is our focus tonight. All week, Britain has been obsessed with the biggest media story to hit that country in my lifetime.
Soham family's hacked.
Murdoch Empire in crisis.
Goodbye, cruel world.
But if you live in Australia and depend on News Limited tabloids for your news, you would have known very little about it until Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation suddenly announced it was closing its lucrative British Sunday paper, The News of the World. It's true the Australian did cover the story and came out on Friday with a high-minded editorial. The next day, the Melbourne Herald Sun followed suit.
The behaviour uncovered at the News of the World newspaper in London is a terrible slur on the profession of journalism. News Corporation's chairman and chief executive Rupert Murdoch has called the actions deplorable.
Quite. But let's remember that for years, News Corporation's British subsidiary News International has covered up, lied about, and paid hush money to conceal unethical and criminal behaviour at the News of the World. News Corporation exposes others, but not itself. Here's intrepid Fox Business presenter Stuart Varney interviewing his boss in 2009.
Mr. Chairman, thanks very much for joining us. We appreciate it, sir.
Fine. Good afternoon.
The story that is really buzzing all around the country and certainly here in New York is that the News of the World, a News Corporation newspaper in Britain, used...
I'm not talking about that issue at all today. I'm sorry.
OK. No worries, Mr. Chairman. That's fine with me.
I'm too far removed out of here.
OK.
I'm sorry.
That's all right, sir.
That's certainly all right, sir. Obfuscation has been going on since 2006, when the News of the World's royal editor Clive Goodman and private investigator Glenn Mulcair were arrested and later jailed for illegally intercepting the voicemail messages of aides to Princes William, Harry and Charles. The then boss of News International was Australian Les Hinton. In 2007, he told a parliamentary committee what would become the company line. Goodman was a lone rogue reporter.
And you carried out a full, rigorous internal inquiry.
Yes, we have, and I believe he was the only person, but that investigation under the new editor continues.
In the past 24 hours, it's been alleged that ultimately that investigation showed that Clive Goodman wasn't alone, but the information wasn't passed on to the police until this year. The Sunday Times, a Murdoch newspaper, alleges that a thorough report was compiled within News International at the time.
Either they were idiots for not having acted on it, or they deliberately didn't, said a source. It revealed possible police payments and indicated enough about phone hacking to be of serious concern.
In any case, the Metropolitan Police conducted a shamefully inadequate inquiry, and it's now clear some police received payments from the News of the World. One journalist at one newspaper, The Guardian's Nick Davies, kept hammering at the story, and on Tuesday he finally cracked it wide open.
News of the World hacked Millie Dowler's phone during police hunt.
A 13-year-old murder victim's voicemail messages not only listened to, but deleted by News of the World journalists. Finally, a supine British media took the story seriously. Revelation followed revelation about new victims, not the rich and famous, but ordinary folk in the darkest moments of their lives. The result has been a wave of public outrage, and in its wake, politicians of all stripes have found a backbone they've been lacking for years.
We politicians, I believe, have colluded for far too long with the media. We rely on them. We seek their favour.
Even the Prime Minister joined in.
Because party leaders were so keen to win the support of newspapers, we turned a blind eye to the need to sort this issue, to get on top of the bad practices, to change the way our newspapers are regulated.
News Corporation showed its determination to get on top of the bad practices by initially giving the job to Rebekah Brooks, the very woman who was the editor of the News of the World when Millie Dowler's phone was hacked, and who admitted to a Commons committee back in 2003 that
we have paid the police for information in the past.
Though she's no longer investigating herself, Rebekah Brooks is still CEO of News International, but the News of the World, as of yesterday, has ceased to exist. James Murdoch, chairman of News International, blamed not the culture, nor the executives, nor the editors, but certain individuals.
Clearly, the practices of certain individuals did not live up to the standards and quality of journalism that we believe in and that I believe in, and that this company believes in. This company has been a great investor in journalism, a greater investor in media in general.
And it's investment that this is all about, especially the investment that the Murdochs were on the point of pulling off. News Corporation owns 39% of Britain's dominant pay TV service, B-Sky B, and it was on the brink of gaining approval to buy the remaining 61% for some $12 billion. The deal is big. The operating profit in 2010 of all News Corporation's newspapers in Britain, Australia and the United States was under $500 million. The operating profit of B-Sky B last year was $1.2 billion, and that's heading up. But now News's access to that cash cow, to create which Rupert Murdoch took huge risks in the 90s, is in jeopardy. In Britain, the takeover looks politically impossible, at least for now.
The idea that this organisation, which engaged in these terrible practices, should be allowed to take over B-Sky B, to get that 100% stake, without the criminal investigation having been completed, frankly, that just won't wash with the public.
Since last Tuesday, the government has received more than 100,000 last-minute submissions, almost all opposing the takeover. And Britain's independent communications regulator, Ofcom, has issued a significant statement.
Ofcom confirms that it has a duty to be satisfied on an ongoing basis, that the holder of a broadcasting licence is fit and proper. We are closely monitoring the situation.
For Ofcom to rule that News Corporation, one of the biggest media companies in the world, is not a fit and proper person would be extraordinary. But not, it seems, impossible. So what's all this to do with Australia? Last week, John Hartigan, CEO and chairman of News Limited, issued a statement to his staff deploring what went on at the News of the World.
I am confident that the practices that have been uncovered in the UK do not exist in Australia, at News or any other respectable media outlet.
Well, some media outlets in Australia do use private investigators to snoop on citizens. One recent victim was New South Wales Transport Minister David Campbell, filmed visiting a Sydney gay club by a team of private eyes hired by 7 News. But so far as illegal voicemail interception is concerned, so far as we know, Mr. Hartigan is right, thank goodness. Where there is a parallel is that in Australia, as in the UK, News Corporation and its editors have enormous power and are not afraid to use it. Since the last federal election, some have been forcefully campaigning against many of the Gillard government's favoured projects and initiatives.
NBN to bring higher costs and new monopoly, state warns.
First bats, then BER, now digital TV boxes. Get set for rorts.
2 examples among many, but both within the portfolio of Minister of Broadband and Communications, Stephen Conroy. And Senator Conroy is one of the few politicians who's not been afraid to hit back.
Finally, Stephen Conroy made a comment in Senate estimates yesterday that the Australian newspaper doesn't bother reporting news anymore. They're engaged in regime change. What did you mean by that exactly?
Well, they've been waging a war since just before the election was finished, creating stories that are completely untrue.
More recently, Senator Conroy briefly resorted to a new tactic. Questions from The Australian and The Daily Telegraph, with his replies, were sent out as press releases to all the media, thereby robbing those papers of exclusive stories. The telly was furious.
Senior Gillard government ministers are sooks, waging an unsustainable and petty war against the media, experienced political strategists said.
And sure enough, that tactic didn't last long. But now there's the curious standoff over the Australia Network. That's the channel delivered by satellite and cable to countries in our region. It costs about $20 million a year, paid for through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and for the past 10 years it's been operated by the ABC. As the contract came up for renewal, pay television's Sky News pushed hard for the right to tender for the job, and the ABC pushed back.
Nowhere else in the world is this put out to tender. We don't put our embassies out to tender, we don't put our Defence Force out to tender, and other countries don't put their public broadcasting and their international broadcasting out to tender.
But last November, Australia did put its international broadcasting out to tender. Sky News and the ABC have put in bids, and a decision, to be taken by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, was expected in early May. The decision didn't come. Eventually, on June the 26th, came this.
The government today announced an extension to the existing Australia Network contract, while additional information is sought from tenderers. The government has decided that national interests should be addressed more broadly.
There was a lot of guff about the political transformation in the Middle East, an area into which Australia Network isn't broadcast. None of that has convinced observers, especially as the official decision-maker will now be Communications Minister Stephen Conroy, not Foreign Minister Kevin Rudd. This is how the Age's diplomatic correspondent reported the affair last Monday.
The Gillard government has made an extraordinary intervention in an official tender process to stop Rupert Murdoch's part-owned Sky News Australia winning a $223 million contract.
Part-owned is right. Sky News is one-third owned by BSkyB, which is, at present at least, only 40% owned by News Corporation. But News Limited chairman John Hartigan is also chairman of Sky News. And most observers are convinced that the push to operate the Australia Network is coming from News. So, has the Australian government suddenly decided, like the British public, that News Corporation's influence is big enough and shouldn't be allowed to get bigger? We asked everyone involved for comment. Unsurprisingly, what responses we got were unrevealing. But we did get one nugget from Stephen Conroy's office, which might come as a relief to the backers of Sky News.
There is no fit and proper person criteria in the Australian Network tender process.
For the ABC, the money involved is significant. For News Corporation, it's small change. But if Sky News doesn't get the contract, stand by for fireworks. Mind you, the Gillard government may well have calculated that the heat from News Limited can't get hotter. Talking of heat, not a word this week about the carbon tax. Hope that's been a relief. Check out our website for more on tonight's stories and join me again next week. Good night.